Start with a teach-in. So our friends from Laos, who are the curators of Silk Keffiyeh, have come and joined us from Laos, and we're going to talk about some of the links between Southeast Asia and Palestine, and that will go on for about 30 minutes. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with our beautiful panelists.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. This project has been in the works for so long. It's such a relief to be able to finally share it with a big audience. I've only done a few small exhibits within Vientiane in Laos. I'm here with Luke Sahai. It's a communist youth organization based within Laos and with diaspora outside within the US. We're here to talk about the parallels of Laos and Palestine. As many of you guys know, Laos is the most bombed country in the history of the world. Currently, we have 2 million tons of US ordnance remaining in our soil. So I want to give a brief history of US imperialism in Laos. So the cycles of Western imperialist aggression doesn't begin with the US, it began with the French. But for the sake of the amount of time that we have to discuss today, we'll be talking about the US imperialists specifically. So against the French prior to 1955, the main resistance force was the Indochinese Communist Party. Then by 1955, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia had formed their own parties in their own countries in succession of the ICP, the Indochinese Communist Party. The Lao People's Party was founded on March 22nd, 1955. It's known today as the Lao People's Revolutionary Party. So, a series of escalations, coups, assassinations launched the country into a full-blown civil war. The Royal Lao government and CIA-backed Hmong tribes versus the Pathet Lao communist forces. So the CIA-backed Hmong tribes believed they were promised an ethno-state in Laos by the US, which is a claim that is denied by military officials, but it's a claim that is believed by most of the Hmong diaspora abroad. So in 1962, there was a neutrality agreement which restated the previous 1954 Geneva Conventions, but with a few regulations in hopes of maintaining a neutral sovereign Lao. So sovereignty and neutrality was never achieved, and even further escalations resulted in the neutralist Prime Minister Suvarnabhumi signing the approval of Operation Barrel Roll, the US bombing campaign that would leave Laos scarred and devastated for centuries to come. So the bombings in Laos are often framed as passive. They are often framed as a casualty in the US aggression on Vietnam, that Laos just happened to be there, that we were just emptying all our remaining bombs that we didn't use in northern Vietnam. But that is not the case. It very much diminishes the large socialist movement that was ongoing in Laos and the very much well-documented US-funded reactionary Royal Lao government that was funded by the CIA and the US. So despite the US and Royal Lao government and Hmong, Vang Pao Hmong cooperation to try and bomb the Pathet Lao into submission, the Lao people, headed by the Lao People's Party, won liberation in 1975. So once again, the cycle of imperialist aggression doesn't begin with the US. When we talk about Zionism, what it is and where it originated, we can think a guy named Theodor Herzl who wrote The Jewish State in 1896, where he calls for the establishment of a Jewish ethno-state. The UK says, hey, that's a great idea. We support that. Come do it in the land of Palestine that will win in World War I. So after World War II, the UN is established and votes to establish this Jewish state in Palestine. This led to the Nakba, literally translated as the catastrophe, in which over 750,000 Palestinians were displaced by all sorts of violent means, which Zionists are still in refusal today. In 1964, we see the formation of a Palestinian Liberation Organization, a coalescing of Palestinian resistant organizations which gained recognition as the sole representative of the Palestinian people by the UN. But still, the colonization, displacement, violence, and murders don't stop there. Israel continues its illegal expansion. More and more Palestinians get displaced. This leads to the first Intifada. This leads to the first Intifada in 1987, resistance against the Israeli state by the Palestinian people. So attempted negotiations are tried over and over and failed over and over again, leading to yet another Intifada in 2000. And this recycle is repeated again in 2023 when in October 7th was carried out from Gaza. So we've just talked a lot about the Royal Lao government and the Pathet Lao Communist Forces and Israel versus Palestine, but where does the US fit into all of this? In the case of Laos, the US was sending excessive aid to the Royal Lao government, which totaled to be around $57 billion over the course of 9 years. Aid that could be taken away at any moment if the Royal Lao government did something they didn't approve of. It destroyed the economy, devalued the local kyip, and created complete dependency on the US dollar. At the height of US aid, 95% of the Royal Lao government budget was funded by the US. So what the US got out of it was a neo-colony in Southeast Asia on the border of Vietnam and China, and potential access to the natural resources in Laos. So at the peak of this, Laos used to be, prior to the US aggression, Laos used to be its own producer of rice and textiles, used to be able to grow its own vegetables, get its own fish from the Mekong, but after US intervention, after its dependency on the US dollar, it had to export rice from Thailand. It had to export cotton and textiles from Japan. So despite having an industry prior to US intervention, we could no longer afford to even grow our own rice, built by the fertilizer to grow our rice, buy the materials needed to grow cotton and to make our own textiles. So everything was traded on the US dollar. So what is there to gain from Gaza? Off of Gaza's coast, there's $524 trillion of natural gas. And Israel's goal is to become a major exporter of this gas. The US has invested more money into Israel than any other nation since World War II, totaling more than $318 billion tax dollars since 1948. They give Israel more than $3.8 billion of military aid a year. In return, Israel's role is to be a regional anchor, a watchdog state, and a place to store weapons for the US. So this is just a few receipts that I made tracking basically the major arms dealers, the major weapons manufacturers in both of these conflicts, in both the Southeast Asian conflict, the US aggression on Vietnam, and the recent arms sales to Israel. We can see that Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Dow Chemical, they all profit from these wars. So again, the US has spent $57 billion for 9 years bombing Laos, and So by 1975, the US had dropped more than 2 million tons of bombs on Laos, in over 580,000 bombing missions. According to the Environmental Quality Authority of Palestine, an estimated 85,000 tons of explosives have been dropped on Gaza as of January 2025. So these weapons are designed to be as disruptive and destructive as possible. Destructive in the sense that they, of course, blow up and destroy things in their path, but disruptive in the sense that people can no longer navigate their land, return to their land, cook, farm, because cluster bombs aren't meant to detonate right away. They're meant to detonate 50 years later, 10 years later, whenever they're found. So even now, weekly, we're still losing children. People are still dying, becoming child amputees in Laos because of US cluster bombs. So in 2024, 62.5% of those injured or killed in Laos were children, with most accidents caused by children playing with the explosives. In Palestine, more than 60,000 children have been reportedly killed or injured since October 2023. And of course, there's environmental repercussions of this. Destroying UXO, destroying large bombs, destroying cluster bombs, also leaks chemicals into the soil. Our Silk Keffiyeh weaver here grew up in Chiang Mai, where she remembers an entire field that was once lush forest has now been limited, has been turned into just grasslands, because now trees have not only been blown up, but nothing more advanced than grass can grow on the land that is now poisoned. And even the vegetables that they tried to grow on the land wouldn't grow, or they'd be toxic, or people would get some sort of illness or child deformities from eating vegetables and growing and drinking water from the land. So aside from that, there's also an increase in displacement, refugees, and diaspora. By 1973, 750,000 of Laos' 3 million population had become displaced. By US intervention, in 288,000 Lao refugees in Thailand and 255,000 Lao diaspora in the US. So between 1947 and 1949, at least 750,000 Palestinians were displaced during the Nakba, and 1.9 million have now been displaced since October 7th in 2023. So with that, there's also the discussion of how the means at which the US dropped bombs in North Vietnam and Laos. They conducted it through US Air Force bases in Thailand. At the peak of the US aggression on Vietnam in 1969, there were 15 US Air Force bases in Thailand. There is actually one in Chiang Mai, which no longer exists. So at least 80% of bombing and Agent Orange missions to North Vietnam were carried out through Thai bases. And at the peak, there were more planes flying out of Thailand than there were out of South Vietnam. So what does this mean for the local population? So we know that, it's not only devastating to the recipient of bombs, but it's also devastating to the local Thai populations. We see huge rates of human trafficking and sexual exploitation within the surrounding Air Force bases and US military bases. We can see that trend happening here in Thailand, where there were only 20,000 sex workers and children in trafficking before the US intervention, and afterwards there were 500,000 women and children as of 1990. So that number grew exponentially because of the US intervention and US bases. You can see that in South Korea, we can see that in the Philippines. So you guys might be thinking, Suvi, this is so terrible. How could anybody allow this to happen? Children are getting bombed in the past, and what we see today on our timelines. How does this happen? Well, very easily through US propaganda. So we've all heard of the beheaded babies myth, the beheaded babies propaganda. But in the past, we've experienced a lot of Red Scare, and that Red Scare was used as a way to manufacture consent for intervening within Indochina. Another way that the West has manufactured consent for intervention is by pinkwashing. We've also heard the myth of, oh, they'd kill you if you were gay in Palestine. They'd kill you if, you were trans in Palestine. And that's simply not, that's simply not an excuse to commit the ongoing genocide. It's a way of claiming Western exceptionalism, a way of portraying the US as these champions of democracy, portraying Israel as these champions of progressive democracy, and belittling the Palestinian cause. So these are some images of, I might be blocking it here, but these are some images of Red Scare propaganda that was used in Thailand. What this essentially does is it dehumanizes communists. Some myths that we're told are, communists will put your family into prison camps or labor camps, or communists will steal your home, they'll work you to death. But it was just a means of manufacturing consent for intervention in this area. So what is the justification against Laos? Well, like I just mentioned, it's to stop the communist forces in Southeast Asia. Laos' proximity to China made it critical to Eisenhower's domino theory. If Laos was lost, if Vietnam's lost, would the rest of Southeast Asia follow? So what's the justification against Palestine? They want to use Palestine to stop terrorism in the Southwest African nations or the Middle East. So occupied Palestine's location within the Middle East was a critical place to stop radical Islamism and keep jihadists at bay, and to prevent Sharia law from spreading to the West. So the Silk Keffiyeh Project that I've curated, we have on display here today on the left, if you get the chance to come up and check it out. It's a project that's taken about 2 years to gather the patterns, the symbols, and transfer it to a traditional Lao-style loom. The Silk Keffiyeh Project is a silk textile project aimed at sparking discussion and deeper reflection among the Lao and Southeast Asian diaspora and about their relationship with the Palestinian people. In both Southeast Asian and Palestinian cultures, weaving and textiles are unique, integral parts to our identity. This project hopes to bridge the gap between those two using this common cultural pillar. Using fine Lao silk instead of the traditional Palestinian cotton, the Silk Keffiyeh is a symbol of the interwoven anti-imperialist struggles faced by the Lao people of the past and the Palestinian people of today. So if you'd like to buy tickets for the Silk Keffiyeh raffle, all the proceeds will be split between our Silk Keffiyeh Weaver and Palestinian Mutual Aid's, the Samir Project, and Healing Our Homeland. You can buy tickets in person here as well. So I wanted to close off with the Lao PDR statement to the UN in 1976. So you guys might be wondering what the relationship of Laos to Palestine is, and I hope this answers it. The Kingdom of Laos was in the grip of an inherently feudal and corrupt regime. That regime was firmly subjected to and conditioned by the United States imperialism, which was a natural protector of Israel, and for the almost 30 years it was in power, had completely undermined the noble tradition of our people, whose natural sympathies went out to all people who suffer. Having ourselves been victims first of colonialist occupation and oppression, and then the cruelest, most barbaric imperialist aggression, we understand perfectly the feeling of frustration of the Arab people in the present situation in the Middle East. our favor in vote of Resolution 3379 on Zionism as a form of racism, and also our decision last January to break off diplomatic relations established by the former regime with Israel. All this shows clearly the firm determination of my country, the Lao country, and government to stand resolutely side by side with the friendly Arab peoples in determination to eliminate all the results of the Zionist aggression and to recover all their occupied territories. And it shows our determination to give our full support to the Palestinian people in their heroic struggle for their right to self-determination, independence, and national sovereignty. Now, this plaque that's on the screen here is actually a plaque gifted by the PLO to our first president, President Supanuvong. You can see it displayed at his house memorial in Vientiane if you ever stop by. It was gifted to us because we were one of the first countries to recognize the state of Palestine. So, as Southeast Asian diasporan inhabitants and firsthand witnesses and victims to U.S. imperialism, it's our duty to stand with Palestinian people and their struggle. So the U.S. prides itself on being the champion of freedom and democracy, but from what we've seen in Laos and Palestine, we can conclude that it's quite the opposite. It's important to be critical and recognize when U.S. pro-democracy organizations start intervening. It's important to not be a one-cause Palestine supporter because yesterday was Laos. Today is Palestine, Sudan, Congo. Tomorrow, it's whoever the U.S. and Western imperialist allies deem disposable to their interests. Yeah, thank you everybody for giving me your time. Please let me know if there are any questions. I know we have to move on to the panelists, so I'm happy to answer them after our panel discussion.